Today I'll be talking about membrane junctions. So membrane junctions, they are specialized structures that connect cells and supporting tissue together, supporting tissue structure, and they provide selective permeability and intercellular communication. So in simple terms, membrane junction are actually connection between cells or between cell and extracellular matrix. So there are three types of membrane junction. We have a occluding junction, the anchoring junction, communicating junction, and the purpose of the membrane junction is to actually maintain cohesive cellular function. That means all the cells are interacting together, especially in tissues requiring regulated environments and synchronized activity. Tissue like brain tissue, they require regulated environments, and like the heart, it requires a synchronized activity. Starting with occluding junction. So on this page, you can see the different examples of junction that we have. So this tight junction, adherens junction, just inferior to tight junction. Then you have desmosome, then you have a gap junction, then you have vocal adhesion and hemidesmosome. So occluding junction, they prevent intercellular exchange of substances. They form a waterproof seal between cells and it prevents leakage and intercellular exchange of substances. Basically, they just prevent intercellular exchange of substances, not completely, but partially. We'll talk about an example that's tight junction very soon. So the structure for occluding junction is made up of proteins like occludin, claudin, so they bind the membranes tightly together, and you can find them in epithelial tissues such as the intestine, in the kidney, in the blood-brain barrier, in the choroid plexus, in the apical margin of the epithelial lining of the intestinal mucosa. So you can find them there. So an example of occluding junction is tight junction. It's also known as zonular occludens. Zonular occludens. So the tight junction actually perform the function of sealing up the cell, the spacing between the cell. So it creates a barrier that prevents the passage of large molecules and ions. So you can find the tight junction in the intestinal epithelium, in capillary wall, in kidney tubules, in blood-brain barrier. So that's where you can find tight junction, and they provide that selective permeability, and they also maintain a controlled internal environment. That's because of the selective permeability. They will allow some smaller molecules to pass through, while large molecules they will not allow. So they provide selective permeability to smaller molecules, but they don't allow large molecules to pass through at all. So the proteins of the tight junction include occludin, claudin, junctional adhesion molecule. Those are the integral membrane protein of tight junction. And then the scaffold protein or the peripheral membrane protein, we have the singulin, the cyclic. So those are the proteins that make up the tight junction. So some of the diseases of tight junction include hereditary deafness, ichthyosis. Ichthyosis is scaly skin, and then sclerosing cholangitis. That's the inflammation of the bile duct. Inflammation of the bile duct. So when there's an hardening, so that's sclerosing cholangitis. So moving, this is an image of the tight junction. So you can see the tight junction here is very close to the external, to the internal. Okay, not internal now. This is the external environment, because this image is showing the intestine. So the lumen of the intestine is actually an is part of the external environment. But when you talk about the bloodstream, that's the internal environment. So moving forward, so this is an image of tight junction here. Moving forward to anchoring junction, I remember we said there are three types of membrane junction: occluding junction, anchoring junction, and communicating junction. So we've talked about occluding junction. So now talking about anchoring junction, they provide mechanical strength by anchoring cells to one another and to extracellular matrix, especially in tissues that endure mechanical stress. In other words, anchoring junction can be between cell to cell or between cell to extracellular matrix. And the structure of the anchoring junction is made up of cadherin protein and also integrin, and they are often linked to cytoskeletal filaments like the intermediate filament and actin filaments. That's why we have two types of anchoring junction. We have the actin filament attachment anchoring junction and the intermediate filament attachments. So those are the two types of anchoring junction that we have. So the location for anchoring junction is in skin, in this heart, in muscle. So that's where you find anchoring junction. Anywhere that is prone to stretching, prone to mechanical stress or movement, that's where you find anchoring junction. With the intermediate filament attachment, we have two types of intermediate filament attachment, or now two examples. We have the desmosome and the hemidesmosome. So we'll be talking about desmosome first. So desmosome is spot-like junction that connects intermediate filament of adjacent cells and provide resistance to mechanical stress. You can find it in the epidermis of the skin, in the myocardium, that's the muscle of the heart, and other stretch-prone tissues. So the importance of the desmosome is to actually prevent cells from separating under tension, and it is crucial for tissue stability in high stress area. So desmosome, in I just want to point out like a key and the key things about desmosome. Desmosome is intermediate filament. It's attaching intermediate filament together and is attaching cell to cell. So moving to hemidesmosome, before we talk about hemidesmosome, so you can see the picture of desmosome here. You can see the intermediate filament, then you can see the plaque, then you can see the linker proteins, then the intercellular space. So that's desmosome. It attaches intermediate filament of adjacent cells together. So talking about hemidesmosome is a junction that anchor the basal epithelial cells. That's the lower epithelial cells. We have the apical part of the of the epithelium, then we also have the basal part of the epithelium. So the cells in the basal part, it attaches them to the basement membrane using integrin. Take note of that. So the location of hemidesmosome is found in the epithelial tissue, particularly in the skin and mucosal membrane. And the importance is that it provides strong adhesion between epithelial cells and the underlying extracellular matrix, preventing cell detachments. So that's one of the reasons why you find them in mucosal membrane. You can see the image of the hemidesmosome here. So it's attaching the cell to the basement membrane or to the extracellular matrix. So you can compare it to that of desmosome. For desmosome, is connecting cell to cell. For hemidesmosome, is connecting the cell to the basement membrane. Next, we'll be talking about actin filament attachments. That's adherent junction. So the adherent junction connect the actin filament of neighboring cells together. So adherent junction, just like desmosome, is in cell-to-cell connection, and it forms a continuous belt around the cell for structural support. So you can find it in the epidermis of the skin and also intercalated disc of the myocardium. So the importance of adherence junction is that it maintains tissue shape and integrity, particularly in tissues that undergo contraction and expansion. The heart does that, it undergo contraction and expansion. So this adherence junction. So you can see the adhesion belt. So it forms a belt around the cell. Then you can see the plaque, you can see the transmembrane protein, that's cadherin. So I also want to point this out. Adherence junction and desmosome, both of them, the protein they work with is cadherin. Adherens junction, adherens junction, and desmosome, both of them work with the transmembrane protein called cadherin. Why hemidesmosome and vocal adhesion, we are going to talk about that soon. Both of them work with integrin. For adherens junction and um, adherens junction and desmosome, both of them are cell to cell, while hemidesmosome and vocal adhesion, they are cell to extracellular matrix. But for adherens junction and vocal adhesion, both of them are attaching the actin filament of the cell. They are attaching the actin filament of the cell, while desmosome and hemidesmosome are attaching the intermediate filament of the cell. So vocal adhesion forms complexes where integrin connects the cell's actin cytoskeleton to the extracellular matrix. So it enables cellular attachment to the extracellular matrix, and you can find it in extracellular matrix like fibroblasts and endothelial cells. So the importance is that it helps in cell movement, survival, and tissue remodeling. So talking about communicating junction, now, which is the last type of membrane junction we'll be talking about. So it allows direct communication between cells by permitting the passage of ions, small molecules, and electrical impulses. It is composed of connexin protein that form the connexon channel, linking the cytoplasm of the adjacent cell. So this connexin channel is actually formed by six subunit protein called connexin. So you can find them in the cardiac, smooth muscle, in for synchronized contraction. So it helps in communication between cells, and you can also find them in some neurons. So an example of communicating junction is gap junction. It's also known as nexus, and it's a channel-like structure that enables the transfer of ions and small molecules directly between neighboring cells. So one cell can transport small molecules and ion into the neighboring cells. So the location is, you can find it in cardiac muscle, in smooth muscle, in neural tissue. And the reason for this is that it facilitates fast cell-to-cell communication. So if heartbeat wants to occur, each cell of the cardiac muscle can communicate within a very short period of time. And then the same thing in peristalsis. So the smooth muscle cells can communicate within a short period of time. So the diseases of gap junction include deafness, keratoderma, cataract, peripheral neuropathy, and ecterotaxia. Keratoderma is thickening of the skin on palms and soles, while cataract is opacity of the lens of the eye. That's like a cloudiness. A person experiences like a cloud in the lens of the eye. So that's what happens in cataract. Then peripheral neuropathy is the damage to the nerves of the peripheral nervous system. So these are the diseases of the gap junction as a result of the mutation of the protein that forms the gap junction. So you can see the gap junction here. You can see the connexon that forms the channel. And you can see the intercellular space. So clinical relevance of the membrane junction include tight junction dysfunction can lead to conditions like leaky gut syndrome, compromised blood-brain barrier, while gap junction defects can be linked to arrhythmiasis in cardiac tissue and certain genetic disorders. So desmosome weakness can cause pemphigus, that's a skin disease, and adherens junction deficiency can impact or affect wound healing and tissue regeneration. So this is a picture of leaky gut. So you can see the normal mucosa, but when there is celiac disease, you can see that all the junctions are disconnected. So that can affect absorption. That's leaky gut in the case of tight junction dysfunction. So the summary of the junction function, you have the occluding junction, an example which is tight junction. It seals the cell and controls permeability. Anchoring junction provides structural strength, structural integrity, while communicating junction helps to helps in cell-to-cell communication, that's intercellular communication and coordination. So this is a table that is summarizing the whole membrane junction that we just talked about, the different examples: tight junction, gap junction, adherens junction, vocal adhesion, desmosome, hemidesmosome. So you can read through. So the key concept we have dealt with today is membrane junction, and we have seen their structure, we have seen their function, where you can find them, their location, and we have also seen the significance of membrane junction in ensuring or maintaining tissue stability, selective permeability, and also enable communication critical for organ function. So thank you for listening. Like, comment, share, and subscribe.